Hello, everybody. This is my very first Zoom lecture, so hang on to your hats. This is an unusual experience. I'm looking at my computer, and it feels like I'm in the Muppet Theater. I'm Statler, and my colleague, Dr. Swanson, is Waldorf. Our title is Medical Myths and Quackery. The full title is Medical Myths, Wives' Tales, Pseudoscience, and Quackery. We had to shorten it for the lecture. And this had its beginnings about a year ago, way before the COVID outbreak. So the presentation of this lecture and this topic seems to be quite timely. So anyway, here we go. By the way, what you're seeing on your screens is a copper bracelet. We will get to that later. This is meant to both inform and entertain all of you. Hopefully it will do that. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Richard Swanson, who's sitting off to my right. I think you can see him on screen. Dr. Swanson is board certified in internal medicine and rheumatology. He was educated at the University of San Francisco, received his medical degree at the University of Creighton, did an internship at Alameda County General Hospital, and then a residency at Portsmouth, Virginia Naval Institute and Hospital. He has been in private practice both in Evansville, Indiana, in South Bend, and in South Haven, Michigan. He has been a faculty member at University of Illinois College of Medicine, Indiana School of Medicine, and he has been adjunctive faculty at Michigan State University School of Medicine and Western Michigan School of Medicine. Dr. Swanson retired in 2015 and currently lives here in Holland. He is a HASP member just like myself. You're welcome.
Dr. John Combs is a
Richard has to unmute himself.
There, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. John is a native of Michigan and went to school here, and then went to the University of Iowa for his dentistry training, stayed on and did his specialty training at the University of Iowa, and has been in private practice of periodontics here in Holland. He has retired in 2017 and is, like myself, a member of HASP, and we're on the Science, Medicine, and Technology Committee. John has also been teaching at the some of the area's schools here, like the community college, and has been, like he said, he hasn't given a presentation like this before, so bear with both of us. We're stumbling along.
Gentlemen, I wanted to, and actually the entire class, so this is a little bit trickier because you're both in the same room right now, by the way, about 15 feet apart. But we're trying to turn down the volume on Richard's computer because we're getting feedback, and I think the class is probably getting feedback as well. So when you hear that, I don't know why it's giving you that that error message, that boink sound. But if it continues, what I would suggest, Richard, is for you to actually come sit out here in the main room. And I apologize because it didn't do that earlier, but I don't know how to turn the volume down on your computer because it doesn't seem to be letting you. But go ahead, John. Thank you. Richard, you're muted again.
It's based upon scientific data obtained from legitimate medical sources, which are listed below. A few of them are listed below. We did not include University of Michigan, University of Minnesota, and we also used Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, Harvard, the Center for Disease Control, the National Institute of Medicine and Health, WebMD, American Dental Association, as well as the American Medical Association, Vox, and CBS Sunday News.
There are some additional things that we did include in this, that didn't include in this list, but the Journal of American Medical Association, Journal of American Dental Association, New England Journal of Medicine, British Journal of Medicine, and Lancet, all peer-reviewed, highly respected publications in healthcare.
Yours, John.
Let's begin this discussion with a review of scientific methodology. And the next few slides are probably the most important slides in our presentation. If you get anything out of this presentation, I hope it's the following information. Scientific methodology is the crux of how we make new discoveries in science, and particularly healthcare, because that's our subject for today. It begins with an observation. The observation might be in a hospital setting, a private practice, it could be anywhere. The observation will generate a question, and the question would be, well, what just happened here? Did A affect the outcome of B in any way? Yes or no? And the question would lead to research. Well, if we want to find out the answer to this, we need to research it. In order to research it, we have to have a hypothesis. And the hypothesis might be A leads to B, or it could be A does not lead to B. Either way, when a hypothesis is developed by an investigator, they will set up an experiment. And the experiment is designed in a way to answer the question of the hypothesis. Does A affect B in any possible way? Once the experiment has been developed and properly constructed, data is collected over a period of time. The data will be analyzed, usually by a statistician or a biostatistician, and then the investigator or investigators, if it's more than one researcher, will come to a conclusion based on this entire process. And that's the scientific method. Biggest risk in scientific research is to control this beast right here, which is called confirmation bias. We all have confirmational bias. You know, it's built into us, but in science, it has to be controlled. So bear with me as I read this. I'm kind of imitating Fred Johnson for a moment. Confirmational bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information that confirms or supports one's prior personal beliefs or values. The effect is strongest for desired outcomes, for emotionally charged issues, and for deeply entrenched beliefs. Well, this is not appropriate in science.
Just so they can
Technical support here. I guess I was getting a reflection. So the control of confirmational bias is critical in developing a true scientific process. I love this slide. It's my favorite slide. We're going to start on the right-hand side of the slide. Scientific evidence can be laid out in the structure of a pyramid. which I have right here. I apologize, it's a little bit blurry. No matter how many times I downloaded this slide, I couldn't get it non-blurry. But I can go through it with you step by step. The bottom of by the way, each level of this pyramid is important. And as you climb the pyramid, the level of importance, the statistical strength of evidence becomes more and more powerful. So the lowest level of this pyramid is expert opinions. And I'll give you an example of that. And this happens to me regularly. Sometimes a friend or a patient or just somebody who knows me will come up to me and they'll have read an article somewhere in a magazine or a newspaper about a newer novel approach in dentistry. And they'll ask my opinion on that. And I'll give them my opinion based on my education and over 4 decades of experience. However, that's not science. That's my opinion based on those other things. The same thing would happen with Dr. Swanson. If someone would ask him a rheumatology question, he would give them an expert opinion because he is an expert. But an opinion is not science. It's just the base level. The next level would be case studies. And an example of a case study would be, for example, if I happen to notice something in my practice, in my office, that patients taking a certain medication had an unexpected or unusual outcome. So, well, this is curious. I think I'll document it. There might be a few people, I photograph it, document it, and submit it for publication in one of the dental journals. It could be peer-reviewed or otherwise. Other people might see that case presentation and have noticed the same thing. And so they will begin other studies of a parallel nature. And now we have comparison groups. So this would be observational studies of comparison groups. That's the third level of our pyramid. So now we're getting more and more subject material, and we're getting more and more data to analyze. This will lead to non-randomized clinical trials or some kind of trial. Now, non-randomized means that there's very few controls. There might be 50 people or so in the trial that are subjects. They're not necessarily broken into an experimental group, which if you're testing a pharmaceutical, it would be an experimental group versus a placebo, and it's not blinded. And these are limited trials. We call these proof of principle trials. And if the trends that we've been seeing in steps 1, 2, and 3 of our pyramid are consistent, then they'll be consistent in the fourth layer of the pyramid. So now the data is building even more strongly. So finally, we'll set up randomized controlled trials. And you've been hearing this term a lot on television from Dr. Anthony Fauci and Dr. Deborah Birx and others. These are critically important because they are randomized and they're controlled. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that you have an investigator who is going to set up this experiment. And let's say we're going to test a pharmaceutical, a novel pharmaceutical product, a drug. And they're going to test it versus a placebo. So you're going to have a red pill and a blue pill. One is the active ingredient and the other is the placebo. It's a sugar pill. It has no effect. And the experiment will be set up where they will enroll hundreds, if not hopefully thousands of subjects, patients, who will enroll in this. And then the investigator will have colleagues that actually administer the trial. And the colleagues, they'll be blinded and the subjects will be blinded. Now, what does that mean? That means that the subjects taking the red pill or the blue pill don't know if they're taking an active medication or a placebo. They don't know. And the administrators of the medication, who are actually doing the trial, they don't know either. Only the overall primary investigator, the lead scientist, understands which is which. So during this process, the data is collected over a week, 6 weeks, 6 months, a year, however long. They have a structure built in, And once that data is collected, it is, as we said before in that previous slide, it is subjected to analysis by a biostatistician, from which conclusions can be drawn. Once we get to this level, the information comes back to the primary investigator, who will look at the data, look at the statistical analysis, and draw conclusions from that entire process. You can see there's so many checks and balances built into this process to prevent confirmational bias. The peak of the pyramid, and this is the most powerful statistically, is multiple clinical trials can be going on globally. And the primary investigator or an investigator can do what we call a meta-analysis. And that is a conglomeration of these clinical trials. They will look at all the trials available, and they will choose the trials that have the same structure so that they can be compared, apples to apples, not apples to oranges. And they might, out of 50 trials, maybe they will be able to compare 10 or 15 or 20 of those, which have enough commonality that the data will be consistent. So they'll combine all of that data and then do a meta-analysis and see if other trials are in line with that first trial. And that's called systematic review or meta-analysis. It is the most powerful tool statistically in proving a hypothesis or disproving a hypothesis, either way. And the whole purpose of it is to prevent the data from being tainted by confirmation bias. Because now I'm going to switch from the left-hand side of my slide here. I love this slide. We're going to take the word conspiracy theory and just scratch that out and put in tainted science. If confirmation bias is not controlled by all these checks and balances, it's very possible that the conclusions derived from the data are going to be erroneous, are going to be false. So instead of getting good science, you get, well, a unicorn. We don't want unicorns in science. So that's the scientific methodology. And that's what you've been hearing on and seeing on television a lot lately. So let's go to the next slide. And Richard, you are on board.
Thank you, John. What we want to talk about now is some early giants in medical science to give you some background. The first one, next slide, is Antonic van Leeuwenhoek. He was a Dutchman. He was a trader, merchant. He was a self-taught scientist, and he developed microscopes. He learned how to grind lenses. His microscopes were very simple as compared to the ones we have today, but they allowed him to see microscopic size critters, if you want to speak, bacteria, red blood cells, protozoans, amoebas, those kind of things. He was able to see them. He did not speak any other language other than Dutch, and so he reported his findings to the British Royal Society, and he wrote about many letters, probably over 50, reporting all of his findings, and they in turn transcribed them into Latin, and they were published. So his work was basically to start out with allowing us to see microscopic organisms using a microscope. Next slide. Louis Pasteur. Louis Pasteur was a Frenchman who did a number of things. He discovered the principles of vaccine. He didn't. He learned how to vaccinate against rabies and then anthrax. He also began to look at microbial fermentation, milk, wine, beer, and he realized that the wine that was being went into vinegar was due to bacteria, and he figured out how he was going to stop this by doing a process called pasteurization, something we all know of in our milk today. He heats the milk up to a certain temperature, and then rapidly cools it. This was in 1862. So he began to look at fermentation and bacteria and how it affected the world. Next slide, please. Joseph Lister. Joseph Lister was a surgeon in England, actually lived in Edinburgh, Scotland most of the time. He took the data from Pasteur about bacterial infections and started to realize that most infections were being spread by the surgeon. They didn't wash their hands, they didn't wash their instruments, they went from case to case, wiping their scalpel on their bloodied apron, and he realized that they were spreading disease. During the Civil War, for example, there were 600,000 deaths. 400,000 of them were due to infections. And so we could see that if Lister's ideas had been known during the Civil War, we might have been able to prevent a number of people dying. Actually, we had a great doctor from Grand Rapids, Dr. Bliss, who failed to accept Lister's findings and did actually probably accelerate the death of James Garfield after he was shot. Bliss kept probing the wound in his back with his unclean finger and led to a massive sepsis. Lister then decided that if he used carbolic acid or phenol and washed his instruments and washed his hands and the operating room, the incidence of disease and post-operative infections dropped dramatically. He published this in 1867, which was just after the Civil War, of course, but but American doctors were hesitant to accept his findings. Next slide, please. Robert Koch. He is the latest of these. Robert Koch was a German. He was a chemist. He was a microbiologist, and he developed what were called the Koch's postulates. And he also worked a great deal on tuberculosis. He did find out that TB was due to a bacteria. He also knew the anthrax, and he developed these postulates. Next slide, please.
We back up for a second.
Back up. Koch's postulates were that one, bacteria infections cause disease. If you take that person who's infected and culture in a sterile condition the bacteria from them, they can grow it. And then they could introduce that bacteria into another subject. These weren't humans, but mice mainly, and get the same disease state in this new animal, and then culture that bacteria out again, finding out that it was exactly the same bacteria. These are his 4 postulates, which are still used today. And he was given the Nobel Prize in 1905 for his research on tuberculosis. He used his postulates to realize that TB was caused by a tuberculous bacteria. Next slide, please.
Well, Richard, before we go on, I'd like to interject a little bit here.
Okay.
These 4 giants, these scientific giants, created what we now call the germ theory of infectious disease. Prior to that was the miasma theory of infectious disease. Miasma means toxic vapors coming out of swamps and polluted water and things like that. And the miasma theory can be traced all the way back to Pliny the Elder in ancient Rome, the Dark Ages, and that era. But these 4 giants destroyed the mythology of miasma theory of infectious disease and replaced it with what we use to this day, which is the germ theory, which is critical to modern healthcare and critical to our circumstances as we speak right now. Next slide.
Okay, we're going to start talking about some of the medical myths, or old wives' tales, as they're often called. popular ideas or beliefs that are passed on from your grandmother to your mother to you with absolutely no scientific basis. These are ideas that people have come up with, and they told them, and they've been following along, and we still have many of them in place today. Next slide. Many of these are old wives' tales, such as cold weather makes you sick. We only use 10% of our brain. Sugar turns kids into monsters. You need to stay awake after a concussion. Chewing gum stays in your stomach for 7 years. You should drink 8 glasses of water a day, and fingers and hair continue to grow after death. Going out with wet hair will make you sick. Pregnancy lasts 9 months. Death by suicide increases during the holidays. Next slide. Eating turkey makes you drowsy. Ulcers are caused by stress and spicy foods. You should wait at least 1 hour after eating before you go swimming. And reading in the dark or watching TV too close will hurt your eyes. Next slide. Let's take a look at some of these. Pregnancy lasts 9 months. 9 months or 280 days misses the mark. Just 4% of women deliver at 40 weeks. 280 days was first introduced in 1836 in a German manual for midwives and was based upon the time from the last menstrual period to birth. But conception does not occur at that time. It occurs later during ovulation, and that can be any number of days after the last period. In 2013, the National Institute of Health checked the number by measuring the period of ovulation to birth, and they found that 268 days was the correct time, which is 38 weeks and 2 days, or 8 months, 24 days, and 16 hours. However, the typical pregnancy can vary by 37 days. So there 280 days or 9 months is a myth. Next slide, please. Chewing gum. Okay. Parents didn't like their kids chewing gum, but they thought that was from the lower classes. Also, they didn't want them to swallow, and they claimed that chewing gum stayed in the stomach for 7 years. However, people empty their stomach anywhere from 30 to 120 minutes after eating. Gum is a mixture of gum and resins with corn syrup, sugar, and flavorings added. The gum base is insoluble, like the fibers of raw vegetables, corn, seeds, and the gum base travels through the digestive tract and is excreted, just like anything else. GI specialists indicate that they have never seen gum stuck in the stomach at all. So it obviously passes through very rapidly. The sugar and corn syrup do the damage to the teeth. And Dr. Cobbs could easily talk about that. Next one is wet hair. Does wet hair make you sick? Does wet hair cause the common cold? No, common colds are spread by close contact that spreads the virus, such as what we're seeing now with COVID. So wet hair has nothing to do with getting sick. It just happens to be an old wives' tale. Next slide. Now, how often did your mother say you can't go swimming until an hour after you eat? This was based upon the idea that blood was diverted to the stomach from the arms and legs while undergoing digestion. However, we have enough blood to keep all our body parts functioning after eating. So there's no diversion. And so the worry about not enough blood to the arms and legs is false. The American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Red Cross do not offer any guidelines about swimming after eating. Unfortunately, alcohol and swimming cause many more drownings than eating. Next slide. Do we keep growing after death? After death, nails and hair appear to grow. After death, actually, nails and hair cease growing. They're alive cells. After death, the body dehydrates, it dries out, and the skin starts to tighten up, pulling back from the nails and the hair, giving them the illusion that they're protruding more and extending further, but they really haven't grown. It's due to dehydration. It's not due to further growth. You're dead, you're dead. Can coffee stunt your growth? There's no scientific evidence using the scientific methods that John talked about that coffee stunts your growth. It was based upon the worry that coffee caused osteoporosis, which is associated with loss of height. However, osteoporosis occurs later in life when you've already achieved your total body height. Children don't often drink coffee, and Scandinavians drink a lot of coffee, and they are often very tall. So it suggests that coffee does not have any effect in there. How many people who drink coffee are short? Same number as who are tall. Coffee stunts your growth is a myth. Next slide. Concussions. Okay. Concussion is any type of traumatic brain injury caused by a bump to the head, blow or jolt to the head, or by a hit to the body that causes the brain to rapidly move back and forth inside the skull. The brain can move about. The brain bounces around, injuring underlying tissue. The misconception is that a patient sleeps after concussion will fall into a coma. This is called the lucid interval from the time of the concussion till he falls into a coma. Actually, only a blood clot to the brain called a hematoma is the cause for a coma. This is very rare. Most brain injuries do not lead to that. If there's no overt wound, worsening headache, dilated pupil, one pupil, not both, one pupil, drainage from the nose or ear, seizures, then let them sleep, let the brain begin to heal. Sleep allows the brain to heal, and today we have CT scans which allow us to determine if there is a serious injury, and these were not available in the past, so they used a lot of myths, so to speak, about head injuries. Suicides. Actually, suicides over the holidays are lower than at any other time. Spring is actually the highest suicide time. This is based upon data from emergency rooms all around the world. The idea seems to have sprung up after the movie It's a Wonderful Life, in which suicide thoughts occurred during the holidays. When there's less light and less energy, it takes a lot of energy to commit suicide. And during the winter, there's less light and people tend to slow down. So actually, it is not the time for suicide. Springtime, when people start to wake up, the ground wakes up, growth, you get more warmth. And so suicides occur mainly in the spring. Holidays actually act as a buffer of sorts to suicidal thoughts, even though we talk about people who are blue and dreary during the holidays because they don't have family, friends, or whatever. But this has not been proven from statistical data. Next slide. Water. How much you take in depends upon your health, your activity, and where you live. Some people have problems. They have to restrict their water intake. Some people are more active than others and sweat, and a hotter temperature causes you more to lose. You need water to survive, though. So how much water do you really need each day? The National Academy of Science determined that you need about 15.5 cups, which is 3.7 liters of fluid. Fluid, mark that, for men, and 11.5 cups of fluid for women. This amount covers water, beverages, and food. Keep in mind that lettuce, for example, is 90% water. And the media took the total amount that was needed and divided it by glasses, which I think are 8 ounces, and came up with 8 glasses a day. This did not include other fluids from your beverages, your coffee, your milk, your soft drinks, whatever. And This calculation did not include, as I said, beverages and food, and thus 8 glasses of water is incorrect. You may need more if you're in a hot environment or if you're very physically active. Next, we're going to turn to quackery.
Richard?
Quackery and or pseudoscience. This is data presented as fact with deliberate falsification or misrepresentation of the facts. A is not B, but in this paper, A is B. Failure to allow scientific peer review. We're not going to let you look at this paper and not have 10 other scientists look it over, or we're not going to accept the peer review findings. So this is quackery and or pseudoscience. Next slide. The original thing we think of is snake oil. After the Civil War, the federal government did not regulate medicines, and people were looking for cures. And these people came up with all kinds of instant relief, bottles of this or that. None of it actually contained snake oil, but it contained alcohol mainly. And they claimed that it would cure everything from headaches to ingrown toenails. Next slide. Supplements always make you healthier. You need supplementation. You don't get enough in your normal diet. We're going to talk about chelation therapy. We're going to talk about soft teeth. We're going to talk about copper and magnetic bracelets. We're going to talk about the use of vitamin E. We're going to talk about megadoses of vitamin C. We'll talk about Laetrile. Dental amalgams causing multiple sclerosis. Have all your dental amalgams taken out. We're going to talk, John will talk about the good old gland, the goat gland doctor, and we'll talk about healing crystals. John, you're on. Or I get to get Prevagen. We've seen this Prevagen advertised constantly. Apoquarin is the main ingredient. It's a protein found in certain types of jellyfish. It interacts with calcium and it glows blue. So I haven't seen many brains glowing blue lately. Supposedly, there's a decrease in calcium in the brain with aging. This has not been proven. Apoquarin is a protein and it's ingested orally. What happens to proteins? They're all broken down to simpler compounds called amino acids. They're absorbed. The proteins that we need are reconstructed in the body. So we're not even sure that this apoquarin gets to the brain. Claims were based upon a single study, never published, in which a bar graph, that's all there was, showed a rise from 5 to 10 to 20% in rapid recall over 90 days. However, we don't know how many people were in the study. It could have been 1,000, it could have been 1, it could have been 5. What happens after 90 days? Do they continue to have better recall? Does it fade away? No explanation of the tasks that they were given was given. So we don't know which objective tasks that psychologists have developed were used. A later study, which was published, demonstrated minimal effect. Next slide, please. In 2012, the FDA sued Quincy Bioscience for false advertising. Quincy Bioscience is the company who makes Prevagen. And they sued them for false advertising and not reporting any side effects. Quincy Bioscience listed Prevagen as a supplement, not a drug, so it didn't have to show that it treats or prevents any disease. This is what's required to call it a drug. If you look at the bottom of many of these advertisements, there's a disclaimer. This does not purport to treat, prevent, or cure any disease. That's what's required. They, however, claimed that it helped with Alzheimer's disease, which is a drug, and it was false advertising. They're still in litigation. Quincy Bioscience has multiple very high-powered attorneys fighting this. The supplement industry is a huge industry, $40 billion a year. Their advertising does not present the facts. It does not mention any side effects, which include headaches, dizziness, insomnia, stomach pains, etc. And next slide. In 2019, it was given out as free samples at the spring training Major League Baseball games. I guess it helped you, if it was supposed to help you, you could remember statistics better. Next slide, please. John, you're on.
Healing crystals. This is fun. This is a concept that can be traced back to Pliny the Elder also, and the Hopi Indian tribes. The healing crystals are purportedly given have healing energy based upon their color, their orientation, and their placement on the body. And they've been endorsed by a lot of celebrities, Kate Hudson, Katy Perry, Regis Philbin, I didn't include here, which that helps in enriched public interest. Essentially, they have a placebo effect. We discussed placebo earlier. Just the mere act of doing something will tend to boost hope, brighten mood, and improve a person's ability to cope with a chronic condition. Healing crystals were discussed at a medical meeting by Dr. Christopher French, University of London, who presented a research paper at the British Psychological Society meeting. And that paper concluded that there was no scientific evidence that the crystals promote better healing than a placebo. Interestingly enough, when I did the web search on this, and you do a Google search on healing crystals, you get multiple pages of choices to click on. And I had to go about 3 pages deep before I found a legitimate scientific resource to discuss healing crystals. Almost all the hits on the Google search were companies selling healing crystals. So those of you who ever do a Google search on a healthcare product, make sure that you look at the various choices that you have. And if it says advertisement next to it, don't click on that one. They're just trying to sell you their product, whether it's healing crystals or anything else. So therefore, healing crystals have no value in healthcare whatsoever. That's separating facets from fact. Isn't that a cool slide? Pulling oils. Pulling oils is purported to remove toxins from the body. You just swish with an unrefined oil, usually coconut oil, it could be sunflower seed oil, sesame seed oil, for a while, and it will supposedly pull bacteria, viruses, fungi out of the body and out of the mouth and pull toxins through the mucous membrane out of the body and eliminate them. But there's a problem with this. The essential oils won't penetrate mucous membranes, which is what line the oral cavity. These are being promoted by a gentleman named Bruce Fife, who happens to be president of the Coconut Research Center. He's a modern advocate and he wants to sell coconut oil. There's no scientific evidence on how it works, whether it works, even works at all, none whatsoever. It's probably not going to harm you, but it's not going to benefit you either. It has been also promoted as a supplement or even a substitute for oral hygiene. And there is some evidence that it can enhance oral hygiene. However, there's a problem with that. In order for the coconut oil to have an impact on oral hygiene and kill oral bacteria, a person has to swish with it for 20 full minutes twice a day. 20 minutes. I can't get people to floss for 2 minutes. I could never get anybody to swish for 20. So if you're pulling oils hoping to improve your oral hygiene, well, you can do that, but you're going to have to go 20 full minutes twice a day. And if you're hoping to pull toxins out of your body by using this stuff, you're not going to get the benefits that you hope for. Richard?
Laetrile. Amygdalin is not a vitamin, even though they call it B17, but it was called B17 so the FDA would not list it, would list it as a supplement. not a drug. It was created in 1952 by Ernest Krebs, and it was a compound that he found in the seeds of fruits, nuts, and especially in apricot seed pits. In the 1970s, it was touted as a cancer cure. We had a number of people who swear by it, including John Wayne, Steve McQueen, and even one of the popes. They took a study with 178 people with cancer who were treated with Laetrile. Only 6 showed improvement. But of these 6, 4 died of cyanide poisoning. Laetrile is full of cyanide. It's banned in the United States because it had no benefit and it may be very dangerous. Cyanide poisoning. This is what they use in prisons to execute people. It used to be the gas chamber was cyanide, sodium cyanide. So I guess if you want to die, you can try taking Laetrile. Next slide. John?
This is yours. You're the rheumatologist.
Okay, well, the copper bracelet. The copper bracelet, next slide. Its purported medical benefit is that it has magnetic attraction to hemoglobin. Remember, hemoglobin is a very complex molecule that does have iron in it. So they claim that the copper and these magnetic bracelets pull blood cells to the areas that where the magnetic bracelet and where it is on and increases healing. Copper bracelets give a minute amount of zinc, which is absorbed in the body, decreasing inflammation, they claim. However, there's no evidence that zinc is involved in inflammation. I have studied inflammation for all my career and have never found that zinc had anything to do with it. It was recommended for arthritic pain. Wear the bracelet over your wrist, your joints, and see that it didn't decrease your pain. Again, I think placebo effect was very much involved. In 2002, the American College of Rheumatology studied this and found that there was of no benefit whatsoever, except from placebo effect. Placebo effect can have positive effects or benefit that the patient perceives as benefit in 30%. Copper bracelets are a very, very, very hot item on the consumer's list. However, there has been no evidence. I can tell you in my 35 years of practicing rheumatology, I don't think that I ever saw a patient's rheumatoid arthritis controlled by a copper bracelet. People claim that the drugs I gave them, plus the copper bracelets, helped, but I also found that people who took my medications without copper bracelets did just as well. Next one is dental amalgams.
That would be me. Back in the 80s, dental amalgams were purported to cause multiple sclerosis. And dental amalgam is a dental fillings, a restorative material that's been used in dentistry for 150 years. And amalgams are a mixture of powdered zinc, copper, silver, and mercury. And very tiny trace amounts of mercury are released into the body over time. By time, I mean decades. However, you get a lot more mercury just by eating fish. There is no evidence of mercury poisoning from dental amalgam restorations. This is from the American Dental Association. And there is no evidence whatsoever showing a causal relationship between dental amalgams, mercury, or multiple sclerosis, or actually any other disease. While we're talking about teeth for a second, I want to talk about the myth of soft teeth, which we kind of skipped over. I can't count how many times in my career patients have told me, well, I come from a family that everybody has soft teeth. There's no such thing as soft teeth. People aren't born with soft teeth. There is a rare condition called amelogenesis imperfecta. It's a genetic disorder in which the enamel in the teeth forms improperly in babies. That's extremely so rare. In my career, spanning over 40 years, I've never seen a case of it yet. So if teeth are not soft, the enamel of teeth is made up of a compound called hydroxyapatite. This is a calcium phosphate crystal. It's the same crystal that you will find that is the hard structure of bone. Same crystal. It's just much more dense in enamel. And it is not soft. The only softness to tooth is called tooth decay. And that's caused by the decalcification by lactic acid and bacteria, from oral bacteria. So amalgams don't cause multiple sclerosis, and there's no such thing as soft teeth. Richard?
Megadoses of vitamin E. Vitamin E is a normal vitamin that we all need, only in very tiny doses. For years, it was thought to help treat heart disease, and it was prescribed to patients by very competent cardiologists. Actually, when they studied the dose, they found that 10% of the people who took high doses of vitamin E had increased risk of death for other reasons, from cardiac disease and as well. The body needs vitamin E, but diet provides adequate dosage. Supposedly 1 pat of butter a day provides all the vitamin E your body can use. The only proven benefit from high doses of vitamin E is that it increases the sperm count in male rats. High doses of vitamin E does not decrease oxidative stress in the body, which is what they claimed. Oxidative stress was involved in atherosclerosis. Interestingly, this is the most interesting, all commercial preparations of vitamin E contain alpha tocopherol, which is the chemical name for vitamin E. The body needs gamma tocopherol. This is a slightly different chemical, I won't explain it, but the body cannot convert alpha to gamma. So everything you take exogenously by mouth, by a pill, goes right through you and doesn't do any good. The best answer is a good diet. A pat of butter a day. Put it on your toast in the morning, put it on your roll or your dinner roll in the evening, or on your sandwich. But you don't need extra doses of vitamin E. Chelation therapy. John?
Oh, chelation therapy.
Heavy metals like lead, mercury, and iron and arsenic can build up in the body and they can become toxic. Natural health care providers and supplement companies claim that they can use chelation therapy, which are drugs to remove these to treat or reduce symptoms of autism, Alzheimer's disease, or heart disease. The National Institute of Health did a large major study, double-controlled, double-blinded, of this therapy and found that it could possibly reduce the incidence of heart disease and strokes, but only in patients with diabetes. This was called the TACT study. However, chelation therapy could have serious side effects. It includes liver and kidney damage, blood pressure changes, and hypocalcemia, which leads to significant problems with the bones and with heart. Calcium is very necessary for cardiac rhythms. EDTA, which is the chemical that is used, is now only allowed to be used for treat lead toxicity and iron overload. Lead toxicity we see in children. We worry about that from lead paint on that. We also see lead. I remember seeing a couple of cases of people who were burning lead battery boxes for fuel in the wintertime. And the smoke in the house and was actually poisoning them. They were all had become totally mentally retarded, so to speak. I hate to use that word. That's not an acceptable word, but it gives you an idea. They had significant brain damage. Iron overload is also treated with EDTA, but in very controlled, small amounts. Next slide. Ah, yes, vitamin C. Megadoses. Megadoses of vitamin C. It's been around for quite a few years. Next slide. 1,000 milligrams. We don't need that much, but this is thought that vitamin C is necessary in the body. Vitamin C is water soluble. So what you don't need goes out in your urine. And it probably makes the fishes very happy. Next slide. We have to thank Linus Pauling. Here he is standing there with an orange in his hand full of vitamin C and the hemoglobin molecule. Linus Pauling was a chemist. He was not a nutritionist. He was not a physician. He did get the Nobel Prizes twice for discovering the cause of sickle cell disease and the molecular structure of hemoglobin. And these were quite important. However, next slide. He began to talk to a friend who believed that vitamin C purported to heal and prevent common colds. He admitted himself that he wanted to live a very, very long life, and he felt that vitamin C was the way to do this. Vitamin C deficiency, however, had been discovered many, many, many years ago. It's called scurvy. It was found by a British physician called James Lind. He was on a Navy ship, 1847. He realized that scurvy was a problem because of the diet of the sailors, and he started to make sure that they were getting doses of oranges and limes and lemons, and that's why the British sailors are called limeys. 1928, St. Georgie identified hexauronic acid. 1931, they found that hexauronic acid was actually ascorbic acid and vitamin C. As I said, he was introduced by an Irving Stone, who was a Hollywood person, to vitamin C. Next slide. Vitamin C became his obsession. He recommended up to 3,000 milligrams a day, but it was reported that he took up to 18,000 milligrams. He eventually started to claim that it could cure everything from retinal detachments to snake bites to the virus causing HIV. A Cochrane review, which is a meta-analysis that John talked about earlier, found that vitamin C reduced the common cold length by 8%. That's 10 hours. Supposedly, it lasts 7 days. This would reduce it by 10 hours, 6 hours and 6 days and 6.5 days. However, high doses did cause cramps, stomach cramps, cause nausea, and it caused diarrhea, and it could contribute to kidney stones. Pauling did not live 25 to 30 years longer as he expected, and he died in 1994, even though he took high doses of vitamin C. So the data does not suggest that it treats the common cold, and it does not treat any of these other diseases. Retinal detachments still occur, and the ophthalmologist will tell you that there's nothing they know of to prevent it. Next slide, please.
The goat gland doctor. There's actually a book about this gentleman. The goat gland doctor is John Romulus Brinkley. John Brinkley presented himself to the public as a physician, though he never graduated from an accredited medical school. He set up a clinic in the 1920s to treat impotence and diminished virility in men. And with all the commercials you see on television with Viagra and things like that, that's still an important issue to this day. He treated patients, male patients, by surgically implanting fresh goat testicles into these human beings. And the result was failure, rejection, serious infections, and sometimes even death, probably more than we know. And he was very busy doing this. People flocked to him. He was so popular, he ran for governor of Kansas in 1930 and
He
garnered 30% of the vote. The American Medical Association found out about him and managed to hound him out of practice in Kansas for fraud. But Brinkley, I'm not going to call him doctor because he doesn't deserve the title. He moved to Del Rio, Texas, which is a border town, and opened a clinic in across the river in Mexico and set up a large radio station, an AM radio station, to broadcast across America to promote his phony treatments and dangerous treatments for impotence and virility. Interestingly enough, the Carter family singers, including June Carter, performed on his radio station live many times. Brinkley himself eventually was shut down, and he died in, I think, 1942, penniless. He should have gone to prison, actually, for all the damage he did to people. But this is want to talk quackery? This is the poster boy right here, John Romulus Brinkley.
Vaccines and autism. The basic issue that we found is mistrust of science. We've seen this with some of our current presidential people. Nothing is more terrible than to see ignorance in action. Next slide. The idea of vaccines leading to autism was raised in 1998 by an article by John Wakefield, a British physician, in the journal Lancet. Unfortunately, Lancet had to withdraw the article later on and admitted that this was a serious mistake on their part, in that this article was not peer reviewed before it was published. Wakefield based his idea on the finding of 6 people, which was interesting. When they looked at this, he falsified the data, and there was fraud, and he also had a financial conflict of interest. He was making money off of these people, so publishing it was a way to increase his own personal income. He refused to accept the peer review findings. This basically, the article was turned over to 20, 30 other scientists who reviewed the work, reviewed the data, and found that it was not a scientific article. He refused to accept their data, and his license to practice in England was revoked in 2010. More than 20 peer-reviewed articles subsequent to that have disproved that vaccines have any tie to autism. However, the media jumped on this and hyped it, and there was fear because of autism, and they were unwilling to accept the scientific data. The article led to a marked increase in measles and mumps in UK, Ireland, and the United States in 2000, showing that this article had led to significant harm or potential harm to children. Next slide, please. Autism is a public health issue, which is frightening. We know that. We can't predict it. There's such a spectrum, but there is no law against being foolish, nor is there a vaccine against ignorance. And there is no way to heal emotional concerns. People who have autistic children are very, very emotionally conflicted. But the health of millions of children are placed at unnecessary risk through deliberate misinformation and discredited unscientific data. And this is unethical. Next slide. We hope you've been demythified, which is my word, as well as entertained by this. And I guess we'll open it to questions. John?
I want everybody to know that demythified is a new word coined by my friend Richard Swanson. He does not have a speech impediment. He isn't trying to say demystified. What you're seeing is what he invented, demystified. And we'd be happy to entertain any questions if you have any. Now, I hope you enjoyed the presentation. One thing I'd like to close with is I recently saw a t-shirt with this wonderful logo on it. And the logo said, prejudice is an emotional commitment to ignorance. And I would love to get that t-shirt. I'd like to change it because you can easily change the word bias for prejudice. It's still the emotional commitment to ignorance. When we're talking wives' tales versus pseudoscience versus quackery, these are different levels of ignorance. And where pseudoscience transforms itself into quackery is when data is intentionally altered or ignored. Usually for financial gain, it could be due to ego or self-glorification. But there's a hidden agenda there. Confirmation bias is a subconscious beast that we all have. We all have this. When it is intentional, then it becomes a real problem, even worse than altering science. It's to alter it intentionally. So that is my concluding statement, and we'll be happy to entertain any questions if anybody has any.
I see we have about 7 questions. Susan, can you feed us the questions?
Hi there. Sorry, I had a phone call come in right when you did that. I'm going to have to walk into a different room because I'm getting feedback.
I saw one about Zicam and a common cold. I can answer that. Zicam is basically zinc. And again, zinc has not been shown to affect viruses. And so Zicam and zinc, it's like a vitamin C. It may very mildly shorten the thing of common cold, but it has not been shown to cure or control the virus.
Richard, did you just ask the question about the common cold?
Yeah, yes, I did.
Okay.
I did.
And I didn't hear anything, so I was just in transit. So is that something that, because I can pick up on the questions now. Did you answer it? I'm sorry. You
Yes,
did.
I did.
Okay. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. This is a unique little setup we have going on here right now. So I'm going to go through the chat in order and see what I find here. Somebody did make a comment that Mythbusters used a scientific method to do very entertaining television, which this is kind of in alignment with that. Someone said, commented that as a child, they tended to get car sick and their parents would give them a copper penny to hold, telling them that it would keep them from getting sick, and commented that that was the placebo effect at work, similar to what you had described earlier in your talk.
Susan, let me answer that about placebo.
Okay.
Placebo is a very powerful treatment. Up to 30% of people will improve from placebo. It's that it shows you that that the mind controls a lot of our health, and if we think we're doing something, it creates certain endorphins in the brain which do seem to make us better. So there is some chemical basis on placebos.
That's a good clarification, as opposed to it being a myth. There is a comment it's not so much a question, but I think it would maybe require a response. A myth I sometimes heard growing up was lockjaw, which is caused by a cut from a rusty nail. Is that a myth? Now that the person didn't ask that, but I think that's the implied question.
No, lockjaw is due to tetanus. And tetanus is a common bacteria that's in the ground, in the soil, and a rusty nail may have been in the soil. And yes, lockjaw is a rare but definitely reported effect of tetanus. So it is not a myth. It is true. It is rare, but it is true.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Again, in order, somebody asked if we could send out the slides. This is being recorded and will eventually, towards the end of December, be online live. But would you be willing to share these slides and I can email them out? Okay.
John?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Great. I can email them to the whole group then. From Bill Bredemeyer, could you talk about exposing kids to peanuts and or germs to build their immune systems?
Yes, there have been, peanuts are a very common allergy. We know that. They can be anything from just itching to difficulty breathing to even dying. And there is some research now that we can offer peanuts in very minute amounts and slowly increasing amounts to desensitize people. It doesn't improve the immune system. It causes certain immune chemicals called antibodies to be developed. So it is being looked at. It's the same idea that the allergist uses to desensitize people to various common weed allergies.
Okay. You've already answered the Zicam cold remedy, which I wish I would have been able to hear. The next question is, can allergies cause tinnitus or tinnitus and or hearing loss? I've heard it pronounced both ways.
Yes, they can. Allergies can cause swelling of the inner ear and can cause effects on the middle ear and the inner ear. And allergies cause nasal congestion, runny nose. So yes, they can affect tinnitus. And yes, they could affect hearing loss. That would be rare, but it definitely could happen.
Great. The next question from Sandy Buller is there evidence that becoming chilled, and we may have covered this earlier, but is there evidence that becoming chilled may predispose you to a cold virus?
Only if you're around people who have the cold virus to share with you. Getting chilled out there by yourself probably isn't going to cause the cold. Even if you are not exposed to a person, that cold virus could be in your living space, just hanging around, waiting to jump on you.
Okay, the next one in the chat is a comment. My dad used to blow cigarette smoke in my ear to reduce earaches. I see John laughing.
I don't think we need to touch on that one.
I don't know an answer to that. I don't know. Cigarette smoke is an irritant. It is warm. It may heat up and cause the tympanic membrane to pop out and not be bulging or not to bulge. I don't know. Otherwise, I can't answer that. John, does it cause soft teeth?
Yeah, it sure does. So actually, smoking will increase the risk of periodontal disease anywhere from 3 to 10 times, depending on a person's genetics.
Mm.
But there you go.
The next question is a cold bacterial or viral?
Viral. That's why going to your doctor and asking for an antibiotic for the common cold is worthless and actually does harm, because we're exposing ourselves to antibiotics that lead to mutations in the bacteria. If you get a secondary bacterial infection, like secondary bacterial bronchitis, then an antibiotic may be of benefit, yes, but not itself for the common cold virus. And there are millions of common cold viruses.
Mm.
That's why there's no vaccine, because you'd have to have a vaccine that would cover multiple different viruses, and it wouldn't work. The shot would probably be a 10 or 20 cc shot, which you would not want to get.
Okay, great questions. The next comment is, in my medical work, had a patient that would take a red M&M every night for sleep, and it worked like a charm. She was aware of what it was. Only red would work, and this was started by her family.
Well, yes, red has been shown to have certain potential effects. This was done in the U.S. Navy in submarines versus red or other colors. What color was the best calming? And they found that light green was, but red can cause inflammation, and it does. That's why many of our pain pills had red coatings on them. So I suspect it was something. It was red combined with placebo, but it worked.
Are there any vitamin C supplements necessary for good health?
Yes, if you're not consuming fruits or vegetables, particularly citrus fruits, and there are many other sources. Today, if you look at all of your cereals and your other foods, they're fortified, and many of them have vitamin C in them. But particularly if you want to look at natural foods, the citrus fruits are full of vitamin C. Also, I think sauerkraut has some vitamin C in it.
Okay. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right because I didn't hear the segment. What is chelation therapy?
Chelation therapy is a belief that certain chemicals in the body need to be removed. These chemicals are involved with causing disease. We have not found from scientific proof that these chemicals are involved in disease, and that chelation therapy is very dangerous. It can cause significant liver damage and kidney damage. And so it's used only today. Chelation therapy is only used with two conditions. One, with a condition called hemochromatosis, which is iron overload, and which is a hereditary condition, and with lead poisoning. We see lead, of course, in like flint. We've been looking at this, and that's why the damage that occurs from lead is often permanent. So using chelation therapy there, but otherwise it has been shown to have no healthful benefits and to have very many serious harmful benefits.
The next question is, what about the Eastern alternative medicine suction cup therapy?
Well, suction cup isn't really Eastern. Cupping was used by the revolutionary physicians. Cupping and bleeding It was always felt that maybe losing a pint of blood would help you. So cupping therapy, I'm not sure how it works, and I won't comment other than that, but I don't know.
The next question is, I've heard that the British naval officers never got scurvy because they were allowed fruit jams in their diets, not the regular sailors.
I don't know about fruit jams, but I do know that every British sailor, including officers, got a tot, which is a little bitty of rum, and they would put lime juice in it to help prevent scurvy. So that's why they're called limeys.
Okay. Well, that is the last question in the chat. We have a few more minutes. Does anyone have anything that's coming to mind, or John or Richard, do you want to bring up something that you'd like to touch on again?
Well, if there's anything that hope that our audience takes away from this presentation, was that the extreme importance of scientific methodology in healthcare to find correct answers by using correct science, and not leading to false science, pseudoscience, poor conclusions, because the proper methods were not used in the scientific process. That's the crux of the whole thing. And everything else after that, these are examples that we gave. But scientific methodology is the ultimate message here. And I hope that will resonate with our audience.
Can I say my question out loud?
Yeah, I'm sorry. There was somebody that I think it's Myra
Yes.
had a question. I'm not seeing it in the chat. So yeah, Myra, why don't you go ahead and
There is a mask advertised that has threads of copper in it. Would that be any more effective than just plain cloth?
I would suspect from common sense, no. But there's a scam artist out there born every minute.
The purpose of the mask is a filter.
The mask is meant to capture the viruses. So the copper, I'm not sure how it affects anything. It doesn't interact with viruses. The mask just traps the viruses and prevents them from being spread to other people. It just allows you to breathe your own germs.
very good. There's another question that just popped up. What about fluoride in water? Good or iffy?
Beyond good. Fluoride in water is 1 part per million, by the way. And it has reduced caries in children by 50%, whether they brush their floss or not. Just the fluoride in water reduced caries nationwide by 50%. Interestingly enough, the first place in America to fluoridate their water was Grand Rapids here in Michigan. The fluoride is very beneficial. There is nothing detrimental about it at all.
I think that it's been shown to decrease dental decay by a substantial amount. Am I right, John?
Yes, 50%. All
50%.
by itself. With bottled water, because I had a bottled water over there. I'm not sure if they put fluoride in that water. I doubt it. Tap water, tap water here in Holland, Grand Rapids, most of America, it's fluoridated, 1 part per million.
There is a condition, though, which is in nature, which there is too much natural fluoride in the water. This is called fluorosis, and it causes the teeth to become brown. And what are they? Any changes, or is it just physical changes? Are they softer?
No, that's softer. When I was living in Northwest Iowa, there was a small town near us called Manson, Iowa. And they had a high concentration of natural fluoride in their water, much higher than 1 part per million. And it would cause some mottling of the teeth. Instead of white enamel, there were little brown patches on the enamel, which is an aesthetic problem, not a health problem.
Okay, thank you, John.
This is observation. This is expert opinion. I'm giving anybody here. But people from Manson seemed, in my experience, to be more resistant to tooth decay because these high levels of fluoride incorporated within their enamel. The hydroxyapatite crystal will incorporate the fluoride ion as the hydroxyapatite develops and lays down enamel. And fluoride ion makes the hydroxyapatite more resistant to decalcification from bacterial acids. That's how it works.
Thank you. There's a follow-up question to that. I'll read you both of these, maybe you can answer. So the follow-up question would be, should babies only get topical fluoride, and is there a brain effect? And then someone previous to that had asked the question on a different subject, is there any harm in the use of antihistamines? And the reason I'm putting these together is I just want to state that it is 11 o'clock. So if you have a prior engagement as a participant and need to leave the class, that is fine. But I'm assuming we can answer a few more questions before we actually close this incredible discussion. So the questions would be, should only babies get topical fluoride? And then on a different subject, is there any harm in the use of antihistamines?
I'll start with fluoride. I live out way north of town, and I'm on well water. And my children received systemic fluoride from me. It was in an eyedropper. They got it once a day, very low dose. It was enough to be the equivalent of 1 part per million. And we did that, both children. There's no issue. That's a study of 2 people, 2 kids, my kids. But there's no evidence that fluoride given systemically or topically to children is harmful. Now, anything done in excess can be toxic, anything. We talked about that with even vitamin C. Too much vitamin C is unhealthy. It's not good for you. And I could say the same thing about fluoride or anything else. Stay within the guidance of recommended doses. If you want to put your children on a topical fluoride or a systemic fluoride, they only need it when they're young, when their enamel is forming. And discuss it with the family dentist or pediatric dentist. And a prescription can be provided to get the liquid fluoride and administer to your children. That's what I did.
The second question about antihistamines, again, if taken in excess and for conditions which they are not appropriate, can cause harm. We see the people who have been using topical sprays in their nose and sinuses over and over again develop certain conditions which are called medicamentosa, which means drug-induced. But antihistamines by themselves are a very interesting class of drugs. In fact, keep in mind that one of the antihistamines is used to prevent ulcers.
Okay. I had a comment that someone said it's a fun presentation and that's their expert opinion.
Thank you.
LOL. A last question that I see in the chat is glucosamine chondroitin, I believe that's glucosamine chondroitin, really effective for joint health?
Thank you. I was waiting for that one. Glucosamine and chondroitin have been researched. There is conflicting data. It will only help with osteoarthritis. It will not help with rheumatoid arthritis or any of the other hundreds of kinds of arthritis. And it's been shown that it probably only works in the big joints, hips and knees. In animals, it's a different story. There is some evidence that it may be of some benefit. So it is not harmless. It is probably of some benefit in some people, but that is difficult to determine ahead of time. And so I would say that it probably helps relieve pain. That's it. Doesn't stop the disease in 30% of people.
Thank you for that. Well, that wraps up the questions in the chat box. I will go ahead and leave. If anyone has a question or a comment, I guess bring it forward now. Otherwise, we will close the class. I would love to thank both of our wonderful speakers, Richard and John, and just an abundance of information. And as that comment said, a very fun presentation, you know, allowing
As
us.
I said, we wanted to entertain as well as inform. And so hopefully we have entertained. You know, John and I are frickin' frack or Tom and Jerry or whatever you want to call us, but we've enjoyed doing this together.
I'm glad you didn't say Dumb and Dumber.
No, we're not. No.
As a retired physician, I just wanted to thank you. I also make a comment about zinc for the common cold. That was based on a study published by a doctor formerly of the Cleveland Clinic, lost his license, total fake, total fabrication. But he had made so many millions by that point, he didn't care. That doesn't work.
Well, that's the same thing from the Cleveland Clinic. I'm sorry. In the Cleveland Clinic, they started using DMSO to treat arthritis. And it turned out that it could cause eye disease. And so you may not have joint pain, but you couldn't see. They made millions off it, again, at the Cleveland Clinic.
And gentlemen, thank you for your presentation. Excellent. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. It was
You're
fun.
welcome.
Round of applause. Thank you so much. Well, the speakers are actually here in the House classroom, so I'll see you after class. And for the rest of you, have a very wonderful day. Maybe we'll see you at this afternoon's class as well. And thank you for attending.